Hello and welcome friends. In Indian economy, in unit 2, we were discussing the nature of Indian economy. Initially we started a discussion on what kind of economic systems are there, and we understood that if we talk about the Indian economy is somewhere near the middle of this continuum between the pure communist kind of economies or a pure planned kind of economies and pure free market economies. Fine. And in that sense, India is considered to be a mixed economic system. We also understood that India is a mixed economy by taking up examples from how both private and public sector exist here in India. But we also saw that on one hand we encourage the private sector, on other hand we still rely on plans which are prepared at the central level now by Niti Aayog. Earlier the plans were prepared by Planning Commission. So in that sense we have the features of both the centrally planned economy as well as the free market economy. We also talked about how there are no fundamental rights to property here in India, which is an example of a feature which resembles the command and control kind of an economy. We understood that the work conditions are also strictly regulated here in India. The idea is to ensure that the workers are not exploited. We understood that there are subsidy for weaker sections, and this is one thing. These are the things which make India a welfare state, which basically focuses on the welfare of its population. We understood also that India is basically a dualistic economy. We took up example from agriculture as well as industries to understand that India is a dualistic economy, and today we need to understand that how India is a developing economy. Fine. So India basically is a developing economy. You know that the developed economies, they form a group which is known as the G7, group of 7 developed economies. Earlier Russia was the 8th member in the group, but now there are only 7 members in the group. Fine. So India is not part of that grouping because India is a developing economy, and you would also know that India is considered to be an emerging economy also. In fact, India is considered to be a part of the BRICS: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and initially there were 4 of them: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And then it has been said that BRICS would become BRICS, and we would have South Korea as well as Indonesia also. So basically this shows that India is a developing economy, an emerging economy which is trying to move from status of an underdeveloped or a developing economy to a more advanced, to a more developed economy. Fine. But as of now, if somebody asks you, India is still a developing economy, it can be called to be an emerging economy, but it basically is a developing economy as of now. Right. Now have a look at the distribution of the development across the countries. If you look at the figure, now this is basically a picture of the globe I have taken, and you can understand that blue is basically the developed countries, while yellow is the developing countries, and the red is the least developed countries. Fine. So you can understand that most of the countries in North America, except Mexico, which means Canada and USA, we have Australia and the Western Europe and Japan. Right. So this is the Western Europe, and Western Europe includes countries like Germany, France. So they are all part of the developed world. Italy also. Right. As far as the red portion is concerned, this one, have a look at the countries here in Africa. Most of these countries are the least developed countries, and you would also see some less developed countries somewhere here, Afghanistan and the adjoining areas, and some portions here as well. They are considered to be least developed countries, and the remaining part of the world is considered to be part of the developing world, which includes India, which includes majority of Asia, includes China also. It includes whole of South America, Brazil, Argentina, Peru, and Colombia, and so many other countries, parts of Africa, and this Arabian Peninsula, and of course the Russia. So these are all considered to be developing countries. Now what happens? Why And how do we understand that a particular country is developing? Please understand that in India, per capita income is increasing. Per capita income increasing means the country is slowly developing. Now, what do we mean by per capita income? I hope you recall your discussion in macroeconomics. Per capita income is the GDP produced in a particular country in a particular time period divided by the population of the country. So that gives us the per capita income, and you can see that there has been a gradual increase in per capita income as far as India is concerned. So we are slowly moving towards being more and more developed. So we are an emerging and an advancing economy in that sense. Population growth rates are generally low in the developing economies. They are the lowest in the developed economies and very high in the less developed economies generally. Of course, there are exceptions, and our population growth rate has started now declining. For example, in India, if you trace our history from 1900s to the current times, you would find that initially India had a very high birth rate as well as a high death rate. So high death rate because there were not sufficient medical facilities available. So the growth rate of the population, which is the birth rate minus the death rate, used to be low. But after 1950s, after our independence, we were able to control the death rate. We were able to bring them down. But the birth rate continued to remain high. So this led to a situation where the birth rate was high while the death rate was much low. So in effect, the difference between birth rate and the growth and the death rate, which is called the growth rate, that was very, very high. And because of that, India saw a period of very high population growth in 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s. And after that, we have been able to slowly reduce our birth rates also. We have brought in family planning programs. Now there are so many family planning techniques available. So because of that, now our birth rate is also decreasing. And so our growth rate has now also started decreasing. Now, since growth rate is birth rate minus death rate. Death rate was already under control and birth rate has now slowly been brought under control. So our growth rate has also started reducing. Fine, and it is expected that India would keep growing in terms of its population by 2060 or 70, and by 2080 our population would start plateauing, stagnating. Why? Because at that point of time the birth rate would be exactly equal to death rate, so there would be absolutely no growth or very minimal growth. So our population would stagnate around 2080. In case of China, it is around 2030 that their population would start stagnating. So we would become the most populous country by 2030. Fine. Now, improvement in living standards of the citizenry, you would find that the living standards have increased a lot. If you talk about the mortalities, for example, if you talk about the maternal deaths during childbirth, death of mother during the childbirth, which is known as the maternal mortality rate. Now, this has been reduced in India, though we are still not in a very good position, but we have been able to reduce that. If you talk about the infant mortality rate, how many infants die within 6 months of their birth, so that has also been brought under control. The life expectancy has increased, right? Earlier the life expectancy was somewhere around 50-60 years. I'm talking about 1930s and 40s. Now in India the life expectancy is around 67 years. Fine. So in that sense life expectancy has increased. Not only this, more we have been able to bring so many of our people out of poverty. Earlier we had a lot of our population below the poverty line, but now that proportion has decreased. Absolute number also has reduced. So it's around 227 crore people in India still below the poverty line, but that has been an improvement over the past. So in that sense our living standards have been increasing. Now there are roads even in the remotest corners of the country. If you talk about Uttarakhand, if you talk about Pithoragarh, you would find most of the villages have been connected by road, and the remaining villages would probably also be connected by road in another 10-15 years. If you talk about the piped water, now the government is planning to ensure that every family, every household has a piped water supply. So these are all examples of improvement in our standards of living. So this shows that India is a developing country. Our Human Development Index score has also increased. Now, what do we mean by Human Development Index, HDI scores? Now, these scores basically are calculated on the basis of these three aspects: life expectancy, how many years can a person expect to live in a particular country, what is the education level. Now, this is calculated using through two criteria: what is the gross enrollment ratio in the schools and what is the literacy level. Fine. So that will give us a score for education. And then we also take another criteria, which is basically per capita income. So basically there are four criteria. Life expectancy is one, per capita income is one, and within education we have got two different criteria. One is the literacy level, the other one is the gross enrollment ratios. Gross enrollment ratio means how many of the children are enrolled into schools. So that is the meaning of gross enrollment ratio. Fine. So 90% gross enrollment ratio would mean that 90% of the people, of the children in the school going age, are enrolled in some school. Fine. So ideally you would want it to be as high as possible, but it cannot go beyond 100%. That I hope you can understand. So this HDI score is is basically a composite of these three criteria. Within education we have got two criteria, so basically there are four criteria, and we are seeing that India's HDI score has been gradually improving. Not only this, within India the HDI score of different state has also been gradually improving. So this is another reason why we can say that India is a developing economy. Now you see that our economy is less dependent on primary sector. I hope you remember our discussion in the first unit wherein I said that generally when the economies develop, they start moving from primary sector heavy to being tertiary sector heavy. People start moving from the primary sector to tertiary sector or the services sector. Fine. So that has been happening with us here in India also. I hope you remember the statistics that we discussed there. Now less of our population is dependent on agriculture and more of our population is now gradually moving towards the service sector and the manufacturing sector. So till almost 20 years ago, almost 70% of our population used to be dependent on the primary sector, dependent on agriculture, but that proportion has reduced now. So we are slowly reducing our dependence on the primary sector, which again is an evidence that India is slowly developing. Fast growth of manufacturing and service sector is taking place here also. Specifically, the service sector is growing very fast in India, and you have seen that now it contributes more than 50% of the country's GDP. So this again is an evidence that India is a developing economy. Our export of primary commodities has been decreasing and we are exporting more of processed items. I hope you recall our discussion while we are talking about the exploitation of Indian colony by the British colonial government, and therein we said that India used to import raw material used to export raw material and import finished goods, and I told there also that this is generally not a very good thing for the economy, because ultimately you would have to lose out your money, because the raw material is always going to bring you less revenue than the expenditure that you will have to incur on consuming the finished products. So nowadays you see that this particular scenario has changed, and now we do not export large amount of primary commodities. In fact, we export a lot of processed items also. For example, we import crude oil, we process it, and then we produce different components like petrol and diesel, and then we sell it in different parts of the world also. So in that sense, this is just an example to tell you that we have started exporting finished products, processed material, finished goods, and we have reduced export of primary commodities. The same point that I was discussing, processed and value added goods, we are reducing their imports and their exports have been increasing, and this is bringing us more and more foreign exchange. So the foreign exchange that we are getting by exporting these processed items would be much more than the foreign exchange that we are spending to buy raw materials. Fine. So let me give you an example. The foreign exchange that we can earn by exporting petrol and diesel would always be more than the foreign exchange that we will have to spend to bring in the raw material to produce petrol and diesel, to bring in the crude oil, petroleum to produce those petrol and diesel. Fine. So this is happening with the country as a developing economy, and that is why we can say that India is basically a developing economy. We also see that there are so many innovations have been taking place. More and more money is being spent on research and development. More and more new types of products are being brought to the market. More and more new technologies, more and more new kinds of designs are being brought into the market, and this is why we can say that innovation is also on the rise in India. We are among the top 5 countries in terms of the patents filed. I hope you remember our discussion in international business. Patents basically give you right over some intellectual property, some invention that you have made. So more and more inventions are taking place, and more patents are being filed in India. So this again is an instance to show that India basically is a developed economy, and we are also seeing an increase in the inward FDI. What do we mean by this? Inward FDI is foreign direct investment. More and more people, more and more companies are investing here in India, because since India is a developed economy, they can earn huge profits by investing in India. So there are so many companies which are investing in India. You talk about Apple, you talk about Samsung, you talk about so many different multinational companies. You would find that they have invested in India. Nestle, for example, has its plant in Rudhipur also. So Nestle is a company from Norway. So these kind of MNCs, PepsiCo have so many bottling plants here in India. So they have been investing in India because India seems to be having brighter future prospects, because India is a developing economy. So this is another reason why we can say that yes, India is a developed economy. This is another evidence of the fact that India is a developed economy. And not only this, because of our growing very fast, our being an emerging economy, being a developing economy, being a fast developing economy, we are able to have greater say in the world affairs. The superpowers listen to us, and we contribute whenever some global affairs are there. We contribute to the discussion and the deliberation. For example, you would recall that India is currently heading the United Nations Security Council. So India has the presidentship of the United Nations Security Council. Likewise, India has taken the lead in launching the International Solar Alliance, which is basically a group to encourage cooperation between different countries, so that more and more of solar energy can be generated. So India has taken lead in that. India also supplies its troops for peacemaking operations in different parts of the globe, right? So India has greater say in the world affairs. There are voices from different quarters. We have got support from different countries for for being a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council. So this basically shows that we have greater say in the world affairs, which basically is an evidence of our being a fast developing economy. Fine. So thank you very much for your time. With this, we have completed Unit 2, and in the next session that we'll have, we'll move on to Unit 3. Thank you very much.